Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever it is that you may be in the world. Today is Thursday, May 10th. Gene Perry here and Rob Haener.
Rob Haener here.
Rob Haener. All right. So it's Freehands Friday number 95, and today we are talking about the K-Mix. Super
Lovely
duper.
LEDs.
So, Rob, I'll let you do a little intro about the K-Mix. How about that?
Alrighty. The K-Mix from Keith McMillen Instruments. It is Instruments, I think. Anyway, is an extremely versatile mixer that you could think of it almost as a soft mixer. It has, as you can see, quite unusual controls. And that actually is critical to why this mixer matters. Most budget mixers, this is in the neighborhood of, I think, high 500s, low 600s, I think. US dollars?
579 is right now what you're seeing on Sweetwater.
Yeah. I'm good at this. Anyway, a little less than 600 bucks. And there's a number of mixers that are cheaper than that. Especially when you're talking about 8 in, 10 out. I mean, frankly, that's not a very high channel count for the high 500s in price. And every other one of those mixers, you'll see, whether they're the same price, a little bit cheaper, a little bit more expensive, they all have lots of knobs, they have faders. Usually by the time you get to high 500s, you've got full-size 100mm faders instead of little 60mm faders they put on miniature mixers. And you might think, well, this doesn't look that fully featured. It doesn't seem to have a lot going on. But in actual fact, this is a transformer. Not iron and wire, but, multifunction. It has 3 modes. You can use it as an audio interface, which we're doing right now, and we'll go into that later. You can use it as an actual mixer, because it is an actual mixer. In case you're wondering, it's digital. It's a digital mixer, which is why it's able to be so compact. And also why you don't need explicit controls. This isn't like a Chase Bliss video where it's digital control of an analog circuit. Like, this is a digital mixer. And the third thing it can be is a control surface. So you may have seen like a PreSonus fader port or the old Mackie Control Universal. I've got one of those that I got to sell at some point. So a control surface doesn't perform any audio functions whatsoever. It just controls on-screen controls with a DAW, for instance. But what's interesting is this is a mixer that can also be a control surface, which means that you can use its audio processing functionality or not, or both at the same time.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now, because I can roll an instrument into it. I'm running a mic into it, and it can convert audio to digital just super easily.
Yeah, so this is an audio interface. However, we are using it sort of as a mixer because we are using compression and reverb that are in the box. They're not like some kind of DSP engine that runs algorithms that are delivered over a USB cable by the driver. You see that with a lot of audio interfaces.
Right.
All of the algorithms, all of the engines are inside the K-Mix. You can't really treat it like a universal audio thing where it runs the plugins, right? Mm-hmm. But it's sort of halfway between a normal audio interface and a UAD interface. Mm-hmm. The control panel, the on-screen control panel, which we're capturing in OBS for this episode, those controls do not control software in the computer. They control functions inside the K-Mix in real time. So this is an important distinction from various audio interfaces you may see that are cheaper that look like they have a lot of functions in the driver control panel. That's not distinctly in the box. And when you combine that aspect of a 8 in, 10 out audio interface, it's 10 out because you can use the headphone out as a distinct stereo out if you want. It's not just an 8 in, 10 out audio interface. It's also a bit of an effects engine.
Yeah.
Because there's reverb, there's compression.
I'm having some fun at your expense, Rob.
Feel free. There's also EQ And oh, I heard that. And a gate, which means that you can have gated reverb, for instance, if you want to track some drums at home,
And
like
also,
80s style.
if you're using it, so one of the things that I found was intriguing is that I've seen Rob Gellner use one of these on his pedal board, and that was my initial kind of attraction to it. And so
Mhm.
because it has two XLR inputs, which make it so it's got, we can talk about that in a second, but what makes it very attractive is you can just run both sides of the stick into this and get a nice hot mix. You've got onboard compression, you've got onboard reverb, and granted, like, it's not a big sky, right? It's not an exotic SP or a JB Nano. It's like none of those things, but it does what you ask it to. It provides this basic level of service. And then also having a noise gate is really nice because if you're in a live situation, you can gate it and just cut it. And so it's like, it means you don't have, if you have another pedal going on, you maybe got a noisy like compressor, in particular, or a preamp or something, and it'll just snap it off, which is just so fantastic. So on the pedal board, and talking as someone who's like a stickist, like that is kind of nice to have. So it takes up a little bit of space, about the same. Yeah, it's much more than a big sky. But anyways, getting back to what you were saying, it's a nice having those onboard features all in once. It just means that you can plug that into a pair of speakers, and if you're just playing, on your own, you're golden.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're definitely going to have another episode going into the wonderful world of using this in unusual ways with musical instruments, including the stick. But
that's right.
I want to point out that the same way that you can use it as you were just describing, even if it's only ever hooked up to your computer, what you then have is a reverb engine that isn't using your CPU. Mm-hmm. And if you've got a lot of tracks going at once, it's also a compressor that isn't using your CPU.
I hadn't even thought of that, but that just makes perfect sense.
If you're recording on a laptop, it's not just small and portable, right, compact and so forth. It doesn't just provide the ability to have a control surface that is easy to pack into your top bag. It also, by the way, means that when you're trying not to use up too much battery or trying not to heat it up too much, you don't want the fan to come on and a mic to catch it, because obviously laptop fans are not designed for studio work. You can use the onboard functions of the K-Mix in real time with the control. So just in that respect, treat it like a VST window, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got an off-board engine.
Yeah.
And it only does a few things, but those are the things that you can delegate to that device.
And you can also, the EQ, we haven't really gone into the EQ. I mean, we could probably do a whole session on that. But just a fantastic option to have. And you can pair up actually 1 and 2 if you want to. We didn't talk too much about that.
Yeah. I believe you can pair the other ones as well, but definitely 1 and 2. Yeah. The EQ is semi-parametric treble and bass with a full parametric mid.
Gotcha. Hey, so we've talked about, I know we wanted to talk about kind of why the K-Mix. So we're at like a good solid 5 minutes now. So I think we want to talk about it as an audio interface. So let's talk specifically about now as just like an audio interface. So I'm a YouTuber or whatever it is. I'm a guy doing live sound, or I'm playing in a coffee house or whatever it is. I just have kind of like a small rig. So let's talk about specifically it being an audio interface, and it's 742.
Okay. So right away, you have the first 2 inputs, 1 and 2, are combo jacks that can take XLR or quarter inch. There's a wide enough gain range that can be instrument level, it can be line level, it can be mic level, and that means that if you've got like a small coffee house gig going, you can run whatever would feed, say, a small PA main, or the front of house if they've got a little PA going, whatever would feed that. Whatever you've got.
See, I was thinking if you were just by yourself. If you were just by yourself, it's just like you're a little corner of the coffee house, and you show up with like 1 speaker or even 2 small speakers, powered speakers. Like I would use a K12, right? I've got a K12. It works perfectly. So the mains on this. So I'll kind of point to it here. The main outs 1 and 2 are considered your like kind of left and right out. But then you have a whole series of 6 other kind of pairs of these are your aux outs. Right? Yeah. And
auxiliary buses are wonderful.
Yeah, so it has 3 auxiliary buses. So if you wanted to run like a reverb out, you would run it out from there and then back into another one of your channels here. So you would run it out from, let's say, number 3, and then you would run it into, let's say, number like 7, right? And then you could adjust that level of how much reverb you wanted. It was so easy because then you're just, I mean, you can't really see it. The video or the camera that I'm using makes it a little bit orange, but it's just like super easy to do. And then like one thing that I like in particular about this is if you touch the bottom, it's not really doing it, but you can mute a channel just by touching the bottom. Yeah. Which is pretty cool.
And in doing that, like in a small like coffee house gig, you're basically running it as a mixer. You're mixing from the stage for your very small PA. But as an audio interface, what I was going to say is if you're running whatever you're running into your powered speaker, most powered speakers will have a through connection. That's XLR. You can then run that through connection into 1 or 2 on the K-Mix. And it doesn't matter whether it's line or mic level because the K-Mix will take it. I mean, adjust your input trim accordingly, but you're not going to overload it easily. It's got a wide range of gain, and it's got, they don't state the input impedance, but whatever it is, it works nicely with what you plug in. Like, you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's auto-adapting or what.
Yeah, you'd be much more qualified to talk about that than I would. But I have noticed that, like, with a guitar or a bass, or in my case, a Chapman stick, I can't really use, even with active pickups, I can't use anything but channels 1 and 2. So so if you have like a trio that's like guitar, bass, and let's say violin, you're not going to have a good time. Unless you have some sort of crazy preamp for one of those instruments, it's not going to be the same.
Well, and this is why DI boxes exist, right? Is whatever it is, you deliver it to a mixer in a format that it will accept. Now, typically those things are mic level XLR, but of course you can also get them line level TRS because the inputs and the outputs on the K-Mix are balanced TRS.
That's right.
So in terms of noise rejection, when you've got your 3-piece, balanced connection.
Yes. So in order to make this video, I'm running the microphone on line 2 here. Right, and we'll talk about how we had made a small adjustment to that, but on line number 1, I'm running a Chapman stick, and I'm running a TRS cable, so I'm running lines 1 and 2 into this, which is super convenient. Like, it just takes TRS like right out of the box. So I'm running a single cable from the Chapman stick, not TRS to dual mono, just TRS to TRS, runs it right in, super easy. If I want to adjust. If I want to make adjustments on my instrument, I can do it with the volume and the tone using the pickup that I have. But that's really easy. And then we'll get into kind of the configuration of this mic when we talk about our configuration, kind of the 4th part of the show here.
Well, I will say this, that we're using phantom power on your mic, and what's very good about this that is uncommon among mixers in this price range is that this has per channel phantom power.
For the first 2 channels, for channels 1 and 2, right?
Well, yeah, for the first 2 channels because they have XLR connectors.
So let's look at that really quickly. Let's take a look at that really quickly. So when I press this 48V right here, you'll see that number 2 is lit up. So that's something that you discovered, I think, where we were like, hey, let's add phantom power to it. So we pressed 48V right there, and you can see that on channel number 2, that green light is lit up, which means it's got phantom power, which means I'm getting plus 48 volts on the mic. So I'm using a condenser mic.
Channel 1, it's red. Yeah, and on channel 1, it's red, and the other channels are black because they're not eligible.
That's right, as you can see right here.
You don't have to remember which channels have the XLR on them because only those that have XLR even light.
Right.
On my mixer, for instance, I've got global phantom power for all 8 mic channels, and I'll screw up the lighting terribly if I try and pan it onto camera. But it's global phantom power. Now, most things should not be harmed by phantom power, hence the name, right? However, phantom power needs to be off whenever you change connections. If I'm running phantom power to my mic as I am right now, and I'm going to connect another XLR cable, I then have to cut off phantom power in order to make that connection, which means I then have to take off my input gain, mute the channel, etc., to make sure there's no loud pops on the mic when it suddenly loses phantom power.
Right, you yell at me when I'm changing channels. You're like, hey, don't forget to mute that.
I'm wearing headphones, dude, you know. But the
fair enough.
That's annoying, right?
Yeah.
Because you can say, okay, well, phantom power isn't going to harm anything that isn't using it. True.
Mm-hmm.
But when you've got to make connections or change connections, right? And let's say you've already set the levels on this mic and you realize, oh, you need to take a DI into channel 3 or something like that. Like, now you have to put everything on hold because it's global phantom power.
I see.
This is per channel.
That's
it's a
right.
better way to do it.
So it has 2 channels. So we're kind of at time for the audio interface. I feel like, you know, like you've got different types of. I've got, in this case, you know, I've got a TRS coming into channel 1. I've got an XLR coming into channel 2, and we haven't really covered the other channels. But you know, I've got a pair of inputs coming in for my for another instrument, a Jamcat, and then on 5 and 6, I'm actually feeding back from the Mac. So the Mac is I'm actually, so when you look at these 2 channels right here, the way we're controlling your volume, Rob, is using actually like a kind of a headphone output into 2 1/4 inches. So you can see right here, that's where that's coming in. Mm-hmm. And that adjusts, to your level. And so that's working out really nicely. And we'll get into a little bit of our configuration in a little bit. So let's talk about, well, I want to make sure that we've covered audio interface, like in terms of like all that there is to know about that. I don't want to miss anything with regards to how the K-Mix works as an audio interface.
Well, how it works as an audio interface is pretty much like anything else. You make your physical connections. You do your recording software, you use the device, you choose the channels, you assign them the tracks. And of course, what I was saying with the K-Mix editor, which we can see on screen, is you have various settings for those connections. So a pure audio interface, you don't have any controls the software doesn't provide. And that's actually why I stopped using audio interfaces and went to mixers, because I didn't want to be dependent on what the software gives me a button or a knob for. I wanted to have a control. I wanted to have a consistent feature set, because I got tired of being able to do stuff in my DAW, for instance, with ASIO, which is a Windows thing, right? But then I go into Skype and I don't have any of those functions.
Right.
Like that bothered me. And so that's why I went to mixers. But of course, the way we've got me going into the K-Mix, right, from the headphone out on the computer, that actually leads us straight into how we bridge the gap between an audio interface and a mixer. So with an audio interface, you make your connections, you change your settings, and like I say, we've got a really good editor here to then make the mixer more compatible with whatever those software settings are. So for instance,
the mixer is exceptional. I gotta say, like the in terms of like the way that they've configured the actual physical box with the interface itself makes perfect sense. There's a couple things, and you might be able to tell me, but like there's a couple things on here that you can do in the interface, rather in the software, that you can't do actually on the board.
Yeah, and that's something you run into a lot with devices that use MIDI or have some other form of remote control. Is frankly there are physical constraints in the physical package that don't exist in software.
Gotcha.
And this is actually something I'm going to touch on in the later session about unusual uses of the mixer.
Gotcha.
Because this idea of missing knobs is also something else I don't like, which again is why I went to mixers where I have my control at all times. But we're using the K-Mix as an audio interface, right? That's how we're delivering basically my voice by way of the computer's headphone out to the K-Mix, and working around what was a software limitation of OBS that prevented us from setting levels effectively. So that's an audio interface. However, if you think about it, the way that we're treating the sound from the headphone out before we deliver it back to the computer via USB, that's using it as a mixer. So we are using it as an audio interface, but we are taking advantage of the fact it's a mixer to do work outside the computer and deliver the result in a format that will allow us to achieve what we need to do.
Yeah, it's
And
super easy too. I mean, it's super easy to do because you can use, like, you can see here, like, just how easy it is for me. Like, if I want to mute a channel, I can unmute the Chapman stick here, and then just as he's like, and mute it, I can solo it. It's super easy. You can do like these S's and these M's down here, give you that kind of control. And then, so, is now a good time to talk really quickly just about the onboard effects? Maybe do like a minute on that, maybe?
well, hang on just a second because I wanted to finish the previous thought.
Sure.
So the way that we're delivering my voice through the K-Mix, which is using its functions as a mixer and then taking advantage of the fact that it's also an audio interface to deliver the result to a computer over USB. This is why having a mixer with a built-in interface, which some years ago, I think around 10 years ago, a writer on Sound called them mixer faces. The advantage of that is if you have a software limitation, like let's say you've got a limited number of tracks that we can record simultaneously, or let's say that you want to deliver a sub-mix to Skype as your microphone, so to speak. You may have a software limitation. You can use the mixer to work around that limitation, do the work inside the mixer, and deliver the result to the computer in a format that it will accept. This is your get-out-of-jail-free card for basically whatever kind of software limitation you may come into with regard to audio routing and mixing, setting levels and mixing levels and things like that. When you have a mixer that also is an interface, that means that basically nothing can stop you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's kind of a nice transition for. Well, let's see, how are we doing on time? Yeah, I think I think we've covered the basics. Let's look really quickly at the effects on it. So one of the things that was most intriguing to me was the effects. So let's see here. It's got.
And we should also explain that the effects are per channel.
That's right. So you can see here that as I select number 1, number 2, right, as I go between these two, this is for the microphone, and I've disengaged these, right? And that what they do is they also split out the reverb, so we'll get to that in a second. But here you can see we've got EQ configured for my microphone, and when we go to look at your stereo sound, right, it's interesting. It looks like we've got more kind of compression. Well, the compression's turned off right here, so we can turn it on right here. But that turns it off. So you've got options here. And then also right here, you've got this separate bank for any number of effects that you're running out of your AUXs. So up here, you've got AUX 3, AUX 2, and AUX 1, which means I can send out a stereo signal to, like, let's say, like a Hall of Fame, and run it back in stereo into channels 7 and 8. And then you'd be able to adjust that using this right here. That would that would be your effects return. So you can use external effects as well. But I suppose what I'm getting at is that you've got a number. You've got the effects that are most important, I think, certainly as if you're just doing live sound, right? You've got somebody that doesn't know how to hold a microphone, right? You're going to compress it a certain way. You're going to EQ it a certain way. Maybe you're miking drums, right? You've got a gate stuff, or you've got a noisy guitar player, whatever it is. But you've got these different, these auxiliary channels. You've got these 3 different compressors. Then you have a whole different, kind of setup or configuration here for the reverb. You've got master level, which is kind of easy to work with. But then on each channel,
you have a global reverb that has a blend per channel.
Yeah. Let me hear you, Rob.
Okay.
Right.
We've got a little bit of a problem. I'm kind of working blind here.
I'm adding a lot of reverb.
Oh, I hear that reverb. Yeah.
So you can have some fun with that. It's we were talking about it. It's not a big sky, right? Like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a lot of PA style effects. It's not about the creation of sound so much as the treatment of sound.
Gotcha. It's just a nice option to have. So, the reverb, the EQ, you've also got this kind of surround feature, which is just like pretty incredible. And there's not.
Yeah, this thing is an 8-channel surround sound mixer. Like, surround sound mastering is, it's a specialty of a specialty. It's like a master's instead of a bachelor's.
Right, and you see how the channels are set up here. So like, if you can see, like channels 1 and 2, channels 3 and 4, channels 5 and 6, and channels 7 and 8 are set up different ways, and you can drag stuff around to like, I mean, this is like insane. I don't like, if you had, imagine 8 powered speakers and you positioned them in different places of the room, you could actually mic different parts of a string quartet and actually have.
Well, this is essentially a benefit of working as an audio interface. Now, true, you could use this as a standalone mixer in this capacity as well, but when you're doing surround sound mixing, you have to assign your tracks in a DAW in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. But then coming out of the DAW, it's often tricky to get your DAW to route to audio devices in a way that feeds those speakers correctly, because a lot of DAWs will want to treat it like a kind of an independent mono, but it's not going to like a dedicated power amp per se, right? In the K-Mix, you can turn on the surround sound mode, set up the channels according to which channel's in what position, and it's effectively a translation layer within the mixer, which in this case would serve as an audio interface, such that the DAW doesn't need to get it right. Yeah. Which means that you can do surround sound mixing without dedicated DAW functionality, right? Which can conceivably save hundreds of dollars and a lot of fiddling around. But also, it reinforces this concept that if you have a mixer that's also an interface, things can't hold you back. Mm-hmm. This understands surround sound mixing. So if you don't have, let's say, the pro version of whatever your DAW is, that can't hold you back.
It's point and click. You know, for me, I don't really understand. If I had 8 speakers, if I had 8 speakers, I wouldn't know what to do with them. But I mean, if I did want to do something like that, you have that option. Or even if you have 4 speakers, let's say you have 4 speakers, you know, you can really have some fun with it, and you can assign specific channels to things. So, lots of options there. I suppose we'll get into MIDI, you know, in another channel or in another session here. But getting back to the channel strip, I think we're about ready to kind of wrap up and talk about a little bit about our configuration. Yeah, have we covered everything on mixer control?
Well, there's just one other thing to add. It's real brief.
Sure.
I had said this also works as a control surface. So what you can do in your DAW is go into MIDI setup and choose, you know, a MIDI continuous control. You know, most DAWs have a MIDI learn function for something on screen. Mm-hmm. Set the MIDI learn function on an on-screen fader for the DAW's, you know, virtual console, right? And then assign it to one of your faders on the K-Mix. Now, it is a MIDI control surface for the fader. But what's great is that can function simultaneously with this as a mixer. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you're running a track out into the K-Mix to do like a submix. You could then MIDI learn the fader for the submix to some other knob so that you effectively have one-finger real-time automation. Something that would normally require automation to do, you can do it through a combination of MIDI and actual audio processing on the same physical control.
And
so it becomes the world's greatest MIDI control surface. You don't need motorized faders.
I mean, from a very more kind of just like a player's kind of performer's, like a person who may not know a lot about that, I can adjust the rate or the feedback of a delay pedal super easily using this. I could just, it becomes just like pointing and clicking, right? It's just like coloring, you know, it's just like now, like it's so easy to do. Once you figure out, you set the latch, you set the tap, whatever it is, you set the feedback of something, you want to program change, it's super easy to do. We're going to get to that, right?
Yeah.
Another session. Okay, so let's talk about our configuration. So, and maybe what I'll do is let me play a little bit of stick here. And so we can hear it as just like as like a mixer control. We've got stick coming in, and just unmute the chat. Actually, I'm going to pick up the stick, then we'll unmute it. And we can't really see the stick, but right now we can hear it. And so when we look at, let's say, something like the reverb, now I'm running, as you can see here, I'm running a single TRS cable in right here, which means my melody and my bass side are going to be the same. Now, if I was using this in a live situation, I'd run 2 channels. I would separate out the melody and the bass side so that I could have compression, EQ, gating, and reverb on independent channels. But because I want to run my mic, this condenser mic, on channel 2, and this accepts a TRS in, it makes it super easy for me. So getting back to the channel strip here, you can see I've got EQ set up for channel 1 here. I can tweak my EQ. It's not quite as discernible here, but it is there. Now something like, something that you will hear right away is the reverb. And then you can adjust that on all the channels. Now if you want to look specifically at the reverb setting, right, you can do that here. And adjust, you've got actually 4. Actually, I think, yeah, there's only 4 settings for reverb. Kind of one of the things that you get on the using the actual interface is that it's not as easy to change that if you're just using the board.
Mm-hmm.
So if we click on the EQ button here, right, I've got 4 faders that I've got these little rollers here, right, which I can tweak, and you'll see it adjust right there on the equalizer. You can see me mixing it, and then you've got another option here, right, but you then have to actually hold down a shift button to get this second feature. So when you hold the shift, then you get this other option, right? See, I'm adjusting 2 things here. But when you're just looking at the board, right, you've got your laptop open, then it's just pointing and clicking. So I'm just grabbing my mouse now and I'm adjusting those. So it's a different experience, of course. Rob, I'm doing it in OBS, damn it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, also, the Skype screen share has been frozen for me for like 10 minutes, so I'm not seeing in real time what you're doing.
okay.
But thankfully you don't need my input for this.
Okay. So basically looking at the way, kind of some differences between actually just using the board itself versus like being at home and actually being able to use the software, right? So when I'm using the software, it's very easy for me to tweak between the low and the low frequency. So if I'm doing that from here, right, I'm adjusting that here and I'm adjusting this here. Whereas if I'm just using the board itself, I'm having to adjust this, and then I'm actually having to hold shift and make that adjustment. So there's a whole different parameter that becomes active. So there's 2 components to the EQ. So really nice to have the software. They made a huge effort to make the software like really intuitive and easy to use. So let me play I'll play a bit of the first invention just to kind of, you can hear what it sounds like. So it does the job, right? It's got a little bit of EQ. You can compress it. If you need to add a little reverb, you can. You've got the absolute basic minimum for doing it live, and then, like you were saying earlier, all the while you can be using it as an audio to digital converter, or using it as, right, like a MIDI controller. And I think also earlier you were saying you can yank the USB control out of the back and it'll still be working the same way, right? You won't have your connection to your laptop, but there's no loss of functionality.
Yeah, because the editor really is a way of visualizing a real-time communication with the internals of the mixer. So the very internal controls that you can't see because it's got a kind of a generic control interface in the physical layout of controls. These specific controls can be shown on screen, and that way you don't have to hold a button to switch the modes for the rotary controls and things like that. Whereas that is useful. You can get a much sort of broader overview through the editor. But what is very good about the editor's design, and I'm sure this is the result of deliberate thought, the editor works the same way the mixer does. So if you want to see these parameters in the channel strip, you click the button for the channel the same way you would push the button for the channel on the mixer.
Okay. And muting a channel, I mean, I was trying it earlier, but like you can see, like if I get it right at the bottom there, it just mutes it, right? Pretty easy to do. So we've talked a little bit. So let's talk about our configuration, right? So what I like about our setup is that we've got a bunch of things going on. We've got different levels coming in. We've had to make different adjustments for each different channel, and we've also got different. I mean, like for what it's worth, we've got different cables coming in. So we're going to talk about our configuration. So let's start with the laptop. So I'm using a Mac, and what I'm doing is when I look at my settings in particular with regards to, I'm running my headphones out of the K-Mix. So my headphones are connected to the K-Mix, and so everything is happening from within the K-Mix. So when I look at my system preferences on my Mac and I click on sound, I'm set up to use my headphones as my output and my internal microphone as my input. So that's how the Mac is set up currently. When we look at OBS, OBS is a bit of a different story. So I suppose we can kind of skip around that. But the long and the short of it is we're running basically a headphone jack out of the Mac into channels 5 and 6 right here. Right, and so that's running in stereo.
Yeah. And we've got differing levels. You mentioned we've got the compressor and the EQ and the reverb on the stick, but we also have differing levels for the stick, your microphone, and the stereo out from the Mac, which of course is carrying my microphone in effect.
Right.
And so we're using it as a mixer, and we're also using it a bit as a kind of an outboard effects unit to a degree with the stick.
That's right.
But also, what I was saying about how because it's a mixer and an interface, you can software limitations can't hold you back. A lot of people have found when they were just getting started with OBS and they thought that they could draw audio from multiple places, and they find out they really can't. And if they have an audio interface because they think that'll let it do that, they find out that the audio they want to route isn't a physical connection in the outside world, it's software in the computer, so the audio interface isn't helping with that either. There are a lot of people out there who sort of stumble on the fact that they need a mixer that can, a mixer that's also a multi-track audio interface, so that they can tell the various software programs to go to certain tracks of the mixer as a distinct audio device through the driver setup, and then do their mix on the mixer and deliver the result to the device that K-Mix is listening to. That's how they do it. A lot of guys who stream, well, non-gendered, a lot of people who stream, they end up running a mixer that is also an audio interface in some capacity, so they can get around that limitation that they had no way of knowing existed.
Yeah, and doing this live with the Chapman stick, I mean, or with any instrument, it would be like you'd have a separate audio interface, and now all of a sudden, when you have that separate audio interface, you've got to deal with headphones. You've got to listen back. You've got to hear what you're hearing. You've got to deal with the input. So you've got an instrument coming in, and then you have to deal with where that instrument is going, and then you've got to deal with where's the output of that? And so you introduce 3 or even 4 variables that you would not have had to otherwise do. So really quickly, let's.
Well, and here's another.
No, you go.
Okay, I was just going to say one thing that I forgot to mention. If you're running a normal audio interface, you'd have to change your system setup to use the audio interface in certain ways, and then if you weren't going to use the audio interface, you weren't doing that, performing that particular task anymore, you'd have to go back and change your systems again. Underscoring the fact that we're doing everything in the K-Mix is the fact that your system sound settings are still to your internal mic and still to your internal headphone out.
That's right.
We could remove the K-Mix and your computer would function as though we never did this because we didn't change your system settings.
Yes. So really quickly on that. So I don't have to make any changes on my Mac. So if I just yank the USB out, like I'm running input and output like basically by default. So which is really nice. So that's great. Then I plug it back in. Now I'm ready to record or do something like we're doing right now. It just makes good sense. So so with regards to our configuration, we've covered how the Mac is set up. So we've got like a couple different kind of components here. We've got a microphone, we've got an instrument, we've got the laptop, and then of course we have the mixer device itself. So we've covered how sound is coming out of the Mac into channels 5 and 6 here, and then I've got the microphone coming into channel 2. Now something about, you'll see me press this plus 48 volt number right here, and you'll see that track number, and we looked at this a little bit earlier, so tracks number 1 and 2 you can add plus 48 volts to. So we've done that in the case with the AKG P120 microphone that I'm using. Right, and that's and so that's easy to see that we've enabled that. If I wanted to enable track number 1, I'd hold down number 1, right? And actually, I've got now, Rob, I have the stick muted. If I come over here,
but don't turn on Phantom Power, dude. You're on a TRS connection to an active like pickup system. Don't turn on Phantom Power.
There you go again. There you go. No, I totally hear you. I'm not going to do it.
It shouldn't be a problem, but come on. We're live and I'm wearing headphones.
And I respect that. So like you can see I've set it to headphone here. I need to get out of headphone. So let's talk really quickly about headphone. So when we come into headphone here, now I've got like this master level for headphone. It's very loud in my headphones right now. So I'm going to lower that, and you can see it happening in real time there. What we found is that at some point we were on different track levels here for channels 1, channel 2, channel 3, channel 4, and what we wanted to do is to set it to main. And then we found that we couldn't get out of this menu, right? So even when we back channel strip, so you have to press one of the tracks that you're back into, and you get back into this kind of main kind of channel strip mode. So a bit on the headphones here. So, and I'm running the headphones out of the K-Mix. As you can see, I think you can see, yeah. Let me, just a quick moment here. Yeah, right here. So this is I'm running out of the headphones. And there's all kinds of cool features. This has an alternate function as well, kind of a right-click kind of feature where you can run a sub out. And I expect that you'll want to cover that in a future episode. We are at approximately, 18? We're at 34 minutes. Okay, so I would say we wrap it up, right? So we've covered that. We've got the mic in here, and then we've got the stick in here with a TRS, and then we're not really using channels 3 and 4 for all intents and purposes here. But then we've got our Mac coming in stereo, headphone jack to 5 and 6 right here. So, and then the only kind of configuration change that we've made is the plus 48 volts on channel 2.
So to wrap up, what we've described, there are an awful lot of digital mixers that have multi-track audio interfaces that will do this. Where the K-Mix comes into its own is using the versatility of it. And we're going to demonstrate that in spades in the next session when we're talking about doing rather weird stuff with it. We're going to be talking about using it with a Chapman stick. We're going to be talking about using it with effects pedals more than just your basic aux bus routing. And that's not the only way to use its versatility. But nothing that we will discuss in that program would be useful with a normal mixer that was also an interface. Like, I may identify 2 of the things we'll talk about that you could conceivably do it, but like the real benefit of the K-Mix is sort of waiting to be discovered. It's hidden behind the absence of knobs.
Yeah. That's kind of a cool way of putting it. Well, Rob, I'm so grateful for all the time you've put in and helping to kind of set this up. So thank you so much for...
Love doing it. It's good to be back.
It is good to have you back, Rob. Rob rides again. So we're wrapping up Freehands Friday number 95. I suppose we'll do it again next week now that we're all set up. And we'll talk a little bit more about, we've covered kind of the mixer control, I suppose, portion of this. So we're not getting into the MIDI. We're not going to get into the MIDI portion of it. What did you want to cover next?
Oh, well, next is the interesting stuff with the Chapman stick and the pedals, which I'm here to tell you is going to involve a little bit of MIDI. But
Gotcha.
It's the really cool part.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. So, listen, Rob, thanks for making this all possible. And I guess we hope to see you next week on Freehands Friday number 96 when we look at kind of more advanced features of the K-Mix.
Look forward to it.
Cheers, brother.
See ya.